Welcome to a new episode of Colleague Claptrap. Today's guest is Dr. Rica Viljoen. Rica, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And also today we have a special guest, Ryan Nakade. He's been a guest on our show before and also a co-host of Growing Down. Rica, if you could talk a little bit about how you got involved with spiral dynamics and just a little bit about spiral dynamics. Most of our listeners probably have a background of it, but if you could sort of just start by the introduction a little bit.
Thank you so much, Matt. In my doctorate, I focused on inclusivity, and it basically looked at multiculturalism, but also how to create inclusivity. So the definition that I derived at was that inclusivity is a radical organizational transformational process that aligns the doing and the being around a shared intent for the organization. But what I did find out was that basic assumptions that I hold, because it was informed by current theory, actually did not apply in Africa. So maybe if I can share one short case study in a mining environment, was I found myself fortunate to do research in Mali, that is in Western Africa, and then was the third poorest country in the world. I did not. I went with a very famous consulting group that published on engagement, and I was actually a little bit starstruck that I could work with these famous consultants and researchers. The basic assumption was that the workers did not trust management. So to my surprise, day one, if I speak in the class and I try to now build trust, nobody would speak to me. And then the second day, I realized that they have a shared opinion of the previous day. And the third day, they work with the work of the second day. I then realized that there's a collective type of decision making in the group, and it's so collectivist of nature, and I did not see that in the initial stages. It actually makes sense if you realize that it's Muslim, it's a Russian trained environment where the local language is Bambara, it's a symbol language, and English is not really, it's translated in between. Bambara is not written, and it's then French and a little bit of English on Bambara, the Bambara nation, very Muslim, fundamentalistic Muslim. And I then realized that I have a shortcut. There's a tea circle after the day. A tea circle is then where they made up their shared decision for the next day. And I then thought, let me just gate crash to learn and to understand where they are, only to realize that females are not allowed there in the tea circle, only males are. So it did create a little bit of I need to work different in the space way, contextual way, you need to adjust. Few weeks into the research, I built the trust and actually got a name. It was the name Jeneba Traore, which gave me, from a social ranking stance, a specific seniority. So if I would, for example, say to Ryan, I really, really like that guitar behind you. You will have no choice, Ryan, you must give it to me because of my social rank. And suddenly, the world that organizations function at, which later I realized is blue and orange in spiral dynamics, did not calculate in a world where it was purple and beige, collectivist, real, driven with spiral dynamics, undertones, and multiculturalism. The last finding that I had was that actually the workers loved their management. However, they cannot, on a piece of paper that we gave them, do you trust man, say that. They were too religious. They can trust Allah. But I wasn't allowed to give that feedback because I was female and I wasn't allowed to. That threw me into a spiral of my own because all my assumptions that I hold was contextually flawed. I came across an old lady. She was then 78 years old. Her name was Lorraine Laubscher, and she was with Don Beck on his 64 trips to South Africa. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful story she has, because it's so wise and story orientated, that I started to write. I thought we must write a life history. So I write chapter 1 and chapter 2. And then I realized, no, she must do her own writing. It's her story to tell, it's not mine. And I took it to a local university, which looked at prior learning validation in South Africa because of apartheid. We did not allow African people to qualify in the same way, and females were not allowed to qualify in the same way that white Afrikaans males would have been allowed to. So she was in that era, so she couldn't finish school. Because of her work with Don Beck, they allowed her provisionally to do a PhD, a doctorate. And I guess everybody laughed at this old lady that wanted to now be there in class. It was ultimately exciting because she remembered the original text. So if the lecturer would say something, she would say, we already have done this in the 70s, and also we have done it in the 60s. And if I remember correctly, from the 40s, there's also something there. She had a photographic memory. So her doctorate then was published when she was 83 years old. And it was on spiral dynamics in the bottom parts of society in the spiral. Really, she called it human niches, illustrating that our thinking structure will result in gifts. And it's like a niche that you are good at, and therefore highlighting and actually conceptualizing purple, purple and also a little bit of red. She graduated 83 and then passed away last year during COVID. Her last few years she worked on beige. Now, why that is so important is, according to her studies in developmental studies, developmental economies as well, she found that about 65% of people indicate a center of gravity in purple, which is then tribal, or you do what you do life for the family and for your people, your tribe, your community. And she found about 15% beige in her findings, with about 10% red, which is up there to the 90% of the developing world's population, where the rest is then condensed in blue and orange, and rule following and enterprising and giving back to earth, and even functional thinking, as some of you on the call will know yellow to be. Because she have been with Don, she also helped me to meet him. And since 2011, I spent my time in really trying to understand his head. That resulted at the end, the last work that we did together was the publishing of the book Spiral Dynamics in Action, Humanity's Master Code, which is now translated in three languages, and 2 more is in process.
Well, that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. One of the things that I guess I was curious about is, so from your book and from Spiral Dynamics in Action, how is it used? How do you find it best used in an organization? And I know you talked a little bit about the mining company. How does someone use spiral dynamics in an institutional setting?
Yeah, that's easy to answer from a logical perspective and hard to live from a practical perspective. So the specific mining house where I worked last, if I use that as a case study, had a South African footprint and then also a footprint in Billings in Montana. And I actually thought that I will not find something totally different in rural Montana, but I actually found a lot of purple. And if you look at enterprises or the purpose of capitalism or the purpose of organization is to make money or to serve its stakeholders. In the case of this specific organization, it's also problematic from a green energy perspective and where the world is going to ensure future investments. Organizations need to start adopting, mining houses need to start adopting a more green philosophy. And I speak green now, green like in clean, but also green like in rehabilitating the earth from a spiral dynamics perspective. So we do see in organizations, this specific one at 80,000 people, we do see a lot of blue from a compliance perspective. It's typically a safety environment, safety first, else you kill people, and standard operating procedures should be followed. Then you have the orange, deal making and growth and ensuring that the market will invest and that there's good stakeholder relations, and then of course green, giving back and rehabilitating. So this specific mining house that I'm speaking about, I joined because of the top leadership that we have done a psychological map on, which was the Graves' original way of describing spiral. And most in the executive team, I found a yellow, whether it's aspirational, I want to be functional, I want to do better, I want to integrate, or whether it was real, is not now open for the conversation. It definitely represented more yellow in the South African sense that I would typically get in a management team. The reality, though, is that the 80,000 workers worked as miners. We have deep mines in South Africa, deep underground mines, and with a huge amount of people in local societies. The towns and is mining towns, and they are formed for the purpose of that community to mine. It's purple. Of course, we had COVID last year, the COVID threat that created so much survival beige. Yeah, and then we have unionism in South Africa, which is red. So from a spiral dynamics or a meshwork perspective, the question to be asked is, how do you get purple and beige and even red to do blue rules, standard operating procedures, and to follow that for safety purposes, whilst a specific level of the organization can be busy with deal making and growth and all the orange and green stuff. So
what can I pause you and ask a question real quick? So did you mention that unionism is red?
In South Africa, definitely.
How so?
Yeah, look, I must say that I spoke about the US operations here, a small mine in Billings. Arguably, I would say that there's blue, green, and green there, because the intent is from the mining, from the union side, very much to have a pristine environment. It's a very environmental driven union there. In South Africa, definitely red. So it manifests in strikes if one is not careful and respectful, and a strike can cause so much money in a mine, if it stops production. I maybe highlight that in 2012, we had Marikana, which was a terrible event where 3-4 people died. The police, it was a strike, and the police shot 34 people, and it was with wage negotiations. through the union. It happened again in 2016, and gold wage negotiation South Africa is on the way again. It's this year. So in a world like that, you need to weave together the different thinking structures in a way that they all feel heard and all feel respected. And there's actually no other way in my head than tackling it from an integral perspective or a yellow or a second tier perspective, where you actually literally ask, why are you here and what's meaningful to you? But remember, the organization also have needs, must also survive. So you wire it then differently around what is important to the people. So you work here so that you can feed your family. We must keep you safe because as a father, you must be able to go home. Or from a blue perspective, if you work here, there's a long-term plan with you, with your career, and you can have shares in the organization. So it's differentiated between different worldviews.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, because, you know, I think a lot of our political background, I think, comes from more of a social, I want to call it socialism, but sort of a democratic socialism. So I think from that perspective, at least how I understand the value memes of, and again, I'm not sure how they unionize in Africa and stuff, but to know that, you know, for example, could an organization label workers as red because they're going against sort of this blue conventional follow the rules? Or are unionists more seen as, hey, wait, let's get a fairly distributed wage here, so, you know, I'm not dependent on the organization to feed my family. So from a spiral dynamics, do you feel like, as if you were brought in as a consultant, do you feel like you always have to sort of side with the organization, or can you sort of educate the organization as far as maybe, you know, I'm not sure in this example if this applies, but maybe the organization is treating the workers unfairly? Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, but it's definitely not the South African reality. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with the organizing structures that Graves and then Beck specifically work with, the figures. So for purple, it will be circular and triangular around a triangle in the middle, where in sociology the triangle is masculine and then circles are feminine. So in a purple environment, a purple organizes around a red head of family, red chief, red leader with power, because there isn't that power. And that's what we see here in South Africa, and it manifested in recent riots and strikes that we had in the country. To support what you are saying, that's why I somehow interrupted myself. It wasn't necessarily the case in the US environment where we worked, where it was much more consultative. So no, I will not side with management if I'm consulting to organization. I do believe that we are here to tackle world problems and functionality. And for me, it's a different voice. So there's a voice of the union, a voice of the workers, a voice of management, but also the voice of how all of this can come together whilst the individual is there. So I hope that I can, with declaring my lens, at least stay as independent as possible.
Yeah, I have a question about how you go about doing that practically. So a little about myself. I work in mediation and conflict resolution, and work with diverse groups of stakeholders and interest groups of all stages of the spiral, right, of all different kind of values and worldviews and perspectives, to try to prevent protest-related and political violence in Portland, Oregon, where I live. So I'm curious about how, from a spiral dynamics informed methodology, right, do you actually try to work with so many diverse interest groups who are all kind of at loggerheads with each other? Like, how do you do that in terms of the communication process? Is there kind of mediation work implicit in that? And I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I guess you know as well. I can ask the question to you too, if you work in that space. So look from a higher, if blue presents and orange presents, which is mostly the case that we will find in an African context, actually developmental context, and even in some of the US environments where I work. I will go in with science. So I will do a type of a mixed method study, or I more and more like to work with a sequential transformational mixed method study, which basically implies that there's theory behind it, but I suspend the theory, like in grounded theory. So you say you don't know, and then to try and get information or do research or diagnose, whatever one would like to call it, more digital in the blue and the orange spaces, much more a relational interview-based ethnographical type of interviews lower in the organization. I'm very aware of the social hierarchy. So in some places, I will go to the elders, I will go to the chiefs to ask permission so that there's mandate. And if you have that permission, it's much easier to enter the system, which most of my work was in that type of spaces. In America, for me, let me start with Australia. In Australia, I mean, you cannot come with power, you cannot come with authority. They will give you respect if you are respectful and worthy of it. So it's been splitting out the ego, splitting out hierarchy. In America, I found where I worked quite relational. So in Texas, it was a different type of relation from in New Orleans, very relational. To Florida, where it was much more structured, but in California, so relational, but another type, greenish, yellowish type of relational stuff. So then that's the entry. I do think that if people start understand, if you can somehow make people feel that you are not going to represent their voice, and you're not going to change that, but also somehow get them out of their own thinking structure to a way of looking at the whole, then most of the times there's a need to provide a future or a better organization, a better environment for, if it's now their children or if it's now humanity at large. So I didn't answer you. I actually can ask the question back to you.
I mean, it's definitely something I'm still figuring out as I go. You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of similar approaches in terms of our attitude to, you know, I think there are some specific techniques that I have used or I've tried, right? I guess some of them would be different kinds of community development or community organizing methods. There's a method, I don't know if you know who Adam Kahane is.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, he has a transformative scenario planning.
Yes.
You're familiar with that? Okay, cool. Yeah, that kind of stuff. I need other kinds of like kind of group systems mapping, right? So they can kind of, that's how you can kind of step out of your own myopic perspective and see the larger whole and the entire landscape of interest groups and values that are kind of all at play here.
Now that's lovely. It's lovely to do it that way. Yeah. I also more and more like to work with like a theory of change, like where you work with the underlying assumptions and really map that out, and then go to the levels and the stakeholders with something like that to at least see the whole. But yeah, it's not easy.
Rica, how do you handle, there's some criticism to stage theory in general, you know, if you're putting, you know, your level above mine, elitism, what backlash do you face when you present this, and how do you handle sort of that critical stance that you're just putting your level above mine?
Yeah. Look, I was particularly scared to speak in Africa about spiral dynamics. So I waited 10 years before I opened my mouth. And because we started beige and purple, but what we sometimes forget is that, for example, if there's a center of gravity of purple, they really do not want to be blue. They don't want to be orange either. Actually, for example, a real purple community will see blue as actually silly and westernized, and they don't want to be like that. Or orange as egocentric and power-driven and wasting money, where they really don't want to be like that either. So I was extremely scared of that in the beginning, but I think if one follow that guidance of like a Lorraine Laubscher, where you work on the intelligence that specific thinking structure or code or VMIM or whatever is the the language that one uses. I do believe that people feel normalized in a way. Okay, so I'm not so dysfunctional after all, even if I associate with beige. Or now I understand why I want to have spirit houses or ancestor houses if I'm in China, or in why I want to acknowledge if I'm in Singapore, why my mother said my dead brother must first marry off another spirit before as a second child I can be married. It normalizes that split that often can be found between blue and purple, where we cannot then transcend and include but reject. So I guess I've been now working with this theory from 1996 onwards. There was one time where a person said that it is classifying people as if they cannot grow. And the specific person came from a green FS type of thinking structure, where he felt that the theory of you cannot be before you are excluding people from growth. I do find that Don Beck's "we are chords and not notes" help. And I do find if you speak true to Gravesian theory of a center of gravity that can go up and down depending on what you are busy with, and then what you actually also can create in the higher levels or second tier levels is the embracing of their own beige again, or the embracing of own purple again, because how on earth can we be yellow, which is beige, to the integral or the square or more than the capacity thereof, or turquoise, which is purple, to the exponential value thereof, if we cannot be the basic purple? So yeah, and I guess if COVID maybe have taught us to embrace beige a bit more and even purple a bit better.
I'm curious about, that's a really interesting part of spiral dynamics theory, right? Is there a kind of recapitulation of the stages at a second tier, kind of starting over, but at a different scale, at a different level, right? I'm curious, kind of building on your last comment about how individuals, ostensibly operating from second tier can begin to consciously reintegrate or re-embrace those primordial rungs of the ladder, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe I can share an example. We had the first Integral African Conference here about 2 years ago. And we were fortunate that 18 people went on an Integral African tour to go and visit all communities that represent all the different, or associate with the different value women's codes, as Don would prefer to call it. What I realized is the almost arrogance that can sit in green, that we can fix you, which is beige and purple, where they do not want to be fixed. And that gap from the egolessness of green, the eyes missing in green, need to be remembered in yellow, as I theoretically then at least move from the first year to the second year, that exponential gap, that huge leap in consciousness. How hard is it not to find I? If you have been selfless and you have created your whole environment around you without the I, it's hard. Which then, in my head at least, or with my experience at least, create again that survival question, just so much more complex. Because where do you fit if nobody else hears that, and you are chameleon-like because you can adopt different thinking structures if you're in different spaces? So yellow is not the nice, in my view at least, nirvana that people may think. And Don have a way of, if he facilitates this, he work with gestalts, constellations, and he doesn't label it like that, so he will and I've copied that, so I will have a group and I will let them constellate where they feel they fit. And the second tier, if second tier people, real people, people that really measure on an instrument or self-declare, self-associate with yellow, if they start seeing the the cacophonical behavior, the chaos in the other colors and how they polarize. There's a cry. There's a cry. They cry. So to be able to find self again is hard work. And I will always remember Aftab Omar, he heads up the Meridian School in California. When he was in South Africa with a Spiral Dynamic 2 certification session, he said that the road to turquoise is bloody. So yeah, for me, I think I'm not sure if I totally answer you, but the real thing to have a look at is whether the thinking structure is more hopeful or fearful. And it cuts the aspirational second year out, where second year traditionally are more hopeful and they're more open. So back to my example, the Europeans in South Africa that saw some of the other colors went back saying that they will never be the same again because of the denial of those systems that's now so visible, and the celebration of the beauty in them changed them, was catalytic, it changed. Yeah, I think that's the work that we all must do, is remembering those aspects of self.
Thank you. I was wondering about a little bit too, you mentioned going back to the Gravian's research. And so what I was looking at is his theory is originally was based on experimental data. And I was wondering, over the years, what has spiral dynamics done anything, and not to say it has to be grounded in sort of empirical research, is there any more research to sort of ground the theory, or is it still kind of going off of the Gravian's model per se?
Yeah, look, in the field, there are also humans, and humans have stories, and one can bring those stories together with their ego, but also a sense of loss and a sense of trust and a sense of betrayal that you do find in organizational theory or psychological organizational theory a lot. That we need to form coalitions and then betray each other too. So I found myself in the academic stream. So I went back to original primary authors. I went back to Don. And then, of course, because what I could find in multicultural theory, I couldn't explain. So I looked at Lorraine. And then Don Graves, you know, that's my heritage. And then I went to integral from there. So I don't have, if I speak about Rica, I don't mind what you call it. If you give it a color yellow or you give it a color teal, what I do want to respect is that Don, in his conceptualization of it, saw oscillation, and he feel betrayed in a way, and I put it in abbreviated commas, because now for him the cool colors, warm colors, cool colors, warm colors, that illustrates collectivism and individualism has been compromised, and that for me is big. So I found it beautiful that people are true to the theory, that they hold to their story. In my own academic work and people that I've supervised academically, most of the theories are a type of grounded theory, types of places where you suspend own values and see what emerged from theory before you superimpose the others. I also do replicate the original Gravesian questions in the academic space, but I find the same categories really. We can put it, classify it differently. I like integral theory because of the different steps and the different application, but for me, there's it's actually, if one speaks from a turquoise perspective, it's actually similar. It's just different angles to it, and how the emotional Velcro that I use to make sense of my reality is maybe just different from another person. And if I judge that, then I'm also not integral. So one can measure it blue, Lorraine, with psychometrics assessments, but that serves blue and maybe orange and not necessarily purple. So I am not sure if I'm really getting to the question of, is there another way to study this than really seeing or asking a person, what do you relate with and what makes sense for you? And maybe look at the criteria of time span, maybe look at the criteria of organizing, how they structure, and there's definitely the time and the energy orientation in the different worldviews.
I was curious about, do you know a little bit, since you bring up sort of the integral model, what do you know from your perspective, how did the split happen between Wilber and Beck? Do you know any background on that?
Yeah, but what I will say will be according to what Don shared with me. So, and it's also in a way published in the book Spiral Dynamics in Action. So Don and Cowan were together, Chris Cowan, and I think Chris came to South Africa about 3 or 4 times. Is definitely valued in that angle. Beck came 64 times, so he did the, if I can say, field research into my country, and then that was his biggest case. And there was at the end of their partnership, a split between blue academics and a little bit more consulting, packaging side that broke that, compromised that relationship. It's such a beautiful example because it's the codes that plays out. We cannot escape our own ontological, epistemological stances, assumptions, our own worldviews. And then Don started to explore with Wilber more on consciousness. It changed to consciousness. In the work that I found in Don's study was letters and books, and even Wilber writing to Don how they enjoy their working together. But later that split, and you can actually see, look at it in some of the graphs. For Don, everything is informed. All quadrants and lines are informed by spiral. It's the underlying logic. And for Wilber, it's integrated in another way. And then the big thing is that change in terms of colors, which is hard for Don.
Yeah. And this might go off to a whole different angle, but something I was thinking about, with South Africa in general, do you find spiral dynamics has been applied politically, or is it still sort of a subset and not many people know about it?
Yeah, spiral dynamics was definitely when Don was here with Lorraine. They worked with Parliament and they worked with the key role players. They worked with Madiba, Nelson Mandela, that passed on, and arguably was one of the people that were, I mean, from a Nobel Prize perspective and a world acknowledgement perspective, really an integral leader. They also worked with other big role players that also got Nobel prizes, like Desmond Tutu, that actually speak about the Rainbow Nation, which some of the folk theory here suggests it comes from spiral. I'm not so sure how true it is, but it's the stories, the narratives. Also with F.W. de Klerk, which also got a Nobel Prize. It was the white male, and I'm sorry that I speak white, it's South Africans still legislated that way, that we should, to rectify the sins, what happened before. So they definitely between the 86 to 94 worked with all those role players, and resulting we did not have civil war in 94. Our democracy came in 94. So our current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, was also trained in spiral dynamics. I cannot say that they work with it consciously. Definitely one of our other leaders that also played, her name is Dr. Ampele Mampele, and she was the wife of Steve Biko, who was the father of the Black Consciousness movement in Africa. Definitely are trained in it. I just guess that the questions of existence are sometimes overriding, and the pools, even if you want to, if you look at Obama, how we have changed over the time, even if you look at Trump, what have happened there, I'm not so sure that what we see is presented of what the individual feel and how collective it presents, or how it's skewed by positioning or party politics. A definite adaptation of spiral in some places. And I know, because I work in 3 local universities, our universities are different from American universities, it's nationwide. 3 universities that I do now in South Africa, of the big ones that do incorporate spiral as in the curriculum.
That's wonderful. I guess my final sort of thinking with spiral dynamics is, I mean, for me, I think it presents sort of a model that can help better situate and navigate for people to know sort of if there are conflicts and clashes happening. It's a theory that I think can best sort of help reduce that conflict. My sort of struggle and my last question is, is there anything we can do to promote the theory more, or I'm not sure if Don Beck has his own organization. Is there more work he's doing to promote it that you're aware of?
I think we can do better, because I think it holds some wisdom. It definitely does. And I do find it extremely worthwhile in all the examples that we have spoken about, where there's systems where there's different worldviews, almost like a merry-go-round where you're in the middle and the little waters go up and down, and you need to navigate the complexity thereof. I am reminded of a favorite quote of Don that said he would give anything for the simplicity at the opposite side of complexity. And spiral in a way does that. What it do for me is that it remove all the obvious diversity factors. So it's now not race, it's now not gender, it's not other identity factors, but I can relate with your thinking. And if I can do that, I mean, there's real meaning in our conversation. We can meaningfully work. I can set you free and you can set me free. And together we can do things in a more functional way if we then go second tier. We can do better. So Don have organized Centers of Human Emergence International. I have the Center for Africa, and there's the center that's extremely active is the center in Den Haag. I'm very close to them. We currently look at beige as well and how that manifests. But in America, Saeed Aflabani is busy with work. Tom Habib is busy with work, and somehow those of us that do not polarize from the integral community actually find a lot of work together, and I do think we should explore that more. I try and present at most integral conferences. I do think our own worldview polarize that in the sense that some people want to make money and sell it as a product, and there is space for that. I definitely integrate that in my own practice and work with the original tools from Don and from Graves. In the Netherlands also work extensively. There's people in France that work with it. I work closely with the Integral European part, Ben Secante and that grouping of thinkers. So there is practical courses. You can go on Spiral Dynamics Certification 1 and 2 that then give you access to some of the assessments. Yeah, so for me, if I would like to say sales speech is not so much the theory, but it's in the humanity that facilitates it together, and then people will buy the book. I guess one could also go the other way around and say, hey, there's a book, then buy me. But yeah, that's not my worldview.
Awesome. Rica, thank you so much for being a guest. Ryan, thank you for being a guest also as well on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. Lovely meeting you and good luck. Thank you for having me, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.